Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Gold Mine. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. Very excited. We got Jim and Mike rejoining us, and Shaun here, of course. It is fantastic. Now, while I am excited, y'all should be too. Do all the things, like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bells, do all that good stuff. Get your emails whenever we go live, which, of course, Wednesdays for The Gold Mine, collective on Fridays. So make sure you are in the loop for that one. If you have any thoughts, questions, comments, by all means, put them up in the comment section. We can engage those throughout. And I am super stoked to get this started. So let's get some intros out of the way, and then we can dive right into the conversation. Mike, you're up first. 10 to 15 seconds. Who are you? Where you come from? All that good stuff. Hit it.
Mike Wilford from the west coast of BC. I was formerly a police officer for 21 years, 10 years as a corrections officer. Before that, I retired from policing in January of this year, and now I am working with a tech startup.
Fantastic. Jim, how about yourself?
Good day. Currently with the RCMP, also on the West Coast, just down the street from Mike. I manage several programs or branches currently out here. Married, got dogs, mountain bike enthusiast, although Red Bull has not picked me up yet. So
it's just a matter of time at this point, I think,
just
really.
time, yeah.
Shaun, how's life out in the mountains?
That's good. Looking forward to this combo.
Awesome. So we're going to be talking leadership lessons. And before we get into any of the videos, before we get into anything else, I want to know, what is the number one leadership lesson that you've learned through your career, through your life, through anything? What is the top leadership lesson that you've hit? Jim, I'm going to come to you first. What do you think?
I'm going to say that it is not about you anymore, and that your number one goal should be to replace yourself. I know I've seen some people in the past. I've been part of their sphere of influence where it is all about them, and the systems that they set up are designed around themselves, and they fail if those people aren't there. So something I've learned is most important to me is just make sure that you are replaceable. The system is not about you. It is not about you anymore. It's about your people, and that should you disappear tomorrow, the system can function without you.
I like that. I like that a lot. Mike, what about you?
I love what Jim just said there. One of the best supervisors I ever had was a guy named Aaron Parody, still in the mounted police as far as I know. When he was a new corporal, I got transferred to his unit. And the first thing we did, like week one, is he sat me down and he said, "Where do you want to go next?" And I was like, at first I thought he was going to get rid of me right off the bat, which I wouldn't have blamed him for. But when I asked him, I said, that's a strange question. Why do you ask? He says, because it's my job to get you to where you want to go next. So his sole purpose was to develop me and have me be able to take over that unit or move on to whatever I wanted to do next. So I would say that's my number one leadership lesson. But seeing as that's kind of already what Jim said, I'm going to say that the next number one leadership lesson I've learned is to always be learning, always be trying to grow, always be trying to be that little bit better than you were yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. Shaun, what are you thinking?
I think I'm going to go with a classic, and that is leadership by example. And the reason I like that one, and it's always my default anyway, but I like that one because unlike Jim's example, which is more of a systemic or systems-based leadership problem to solve, I think that going down to the other end of the spectrum, and that is right down to the personal level, you get to represent the system in a way, but through leadership by example, you have to distill all of the other attributes of leadership to be able to kind of own them, to be able to demonstrate them. So leadership by example from a good leader should portray all of the elements of leadership, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. There's lots of places to go with this, and so I want to flip the script a little bit and talk about what has been the biggest cost of leadership now. So we have our biggest lesson, but what so far has been your biggest cost in terms of being in leadership? Jim, I'm going to come back to you. What do you think?
I think it's the other edge of that sword is that when it is not about you, you are representing everyone. Their interests are your interests. That is it's a huge time grab. It sucks the life out of you sometimes, trying to be everything to everyone. So there's I guess there is a cost to doing that poorly and trying, I guess, failing to be everything to everyone, or not sure where I'm going with that. You know what I'm saying? Trying to be too much to everyone on the opposite side of that coin.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike, any thoughts on this?
Yeah. Again, I hate going after Jim because he always says something smarter than me. But if you do it right, if you do it like Jim said, where you put your people first, and it's all about them and not about you, that's exhausting, because you're kind of never off. If you're truly taking care of your people, then you have to be available for them, and you have to absorb their stuff at work and away from work, and it can take a lot. And if you don't have, so I guess the lesson to be learned there is to make sure that you have a support system of other leaders that are like-minded, that you can bounce stuff off of and debrief with, because it can very quickly become a very lonely place if you're not careful.
100%. Shaun, biggest cost? What do you think?
Oh boy, there's so many, but holy moly, what Jim said made me rethink something that I've never thought about before. So it's a novel idea, and it's not that I haven't considered the subject as Jim laid it out. It's just that I've never thought of it this way for Shaun. So jumping back into the hot tub time machine, I identified early on in my career, my military career, a guy that I was going to try and emulate. And he was the first guy that I thought, oh, wow, he's the man. And like, he stood out so much as the man, and his name is Ken Murphy, that I wanted to kind of like follow in his footsteps. And so I identified the guy that I thought was the leader that I wanted to be. And it worked out for me. Like, I pursued hard, and it was within my capacity to follow in his footsteps to some degree and not reach the heights that maybe he did as a leader, or not be the perfect example that I want to be based on, the avatar that I created called Ken. But I tried pretty hard, but it was within my reach. But when I was looking at Ken for the first time, what I didn't understand was that sometimes you can reach too far, or reach for the stars and it's out of your reach. And so I was lucky, man. It was early in my career. I was a young guy, and I had confidence and I had abilities. But what I didn't have is the maturity or the wisdom to understand that I was probably reaching too far. I could have maybe reached for another leader that was kind of within my grasp, rather than reaching for a leader that was out of my grasp as we'll call it a passive mentor. So I kind of got lucky that I managed to hang on to those coattails, those fiery coattails, and sort of have some success with that. But I think that it was a bit of luck that I chose him and managed to get close to it. I could have chosen another guy that would have screwed up my leadership path by underreaching or overreaching to such a degree that, it broke me. So I kind of got lucky by choosing Ken as the leader that I wanted to emulate. And he was just enough out of my reach that it kept me going, but I never got to grasp it, so it always kept me hungry. So choosing early in my career was a bit of luck, I think, as well as, of course, the right choice.
Yeah. And, it's interesting. I just saw a video from Fuel Hunt, and they were talking about the fact that most people they aim low, and then they get it. And then they're like, oh, okay, cool. Well, now I'm here, right? Versus aiming way off in the distance and coming up short, which is still farther than what most people would aim at to begin with. So I think that's a great point. Now, the reason I bring up the challenges, or not so much challenges, the reason I bring that up is that this video that I have leads right into it. And this guy talks about the three main costs of leadership. So we're going to watch this, and then I'm going to get you guys' thoughts on it. Here we go.
Really want to be honest and upfront about leadership. You can't ignore the cost of leadership. Great leaders are willing to accept those costs. And I want to share quickly 3 of those things. 3 of the costs that are plastered on my desk right behind it that kind of caught me between the eyes last week. Number 1, you will have to make hard decisions that negatively affect people you care about. Number 2, you will be disliked despite your best attempt to do the best for the most. And number 3, you will be misunderstood and won't always have the opportunity to defend yourself. Those are 3 costs that come from being a great leader.
Bam. Let's get some thoughts on that right off the bat. Mike, I'm going to come to you first. What do you think?
I think I have both experienced all of those things myself as a leader, and also been on the other side of the coin. I've been the guy misunderstanding the leader without giving them an opportunity to explain themselves. I've been the guy that was negatively impacted by a decision that they had to make, and narrow-mindedly only thought of how that was impacting me. So it's easy to have every single one of those happen to you, both as a leader and as a follower. And you can do all of those things, do the best you can, no matter what. You're still going to piss people off, and you're still going to have negative impacts on their career and their personal life, when there's just no other option. And sometimes you have to make those hard decisions, but it's just important to be aware of each of those costs from both perspectives.
Yeah, I think knowing about those ahead of time would help mitigate them at least a little bit in my mind. Jim, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, the quick list I scribbled down before the show. I had learned to communicate and learn how to have difficult conversations. And there's a quote, I don't know where it came from, but there's no easy way to cut somebody's head off. And those negative decisions that you have to make as a leader, they will affect those around you. They'll affect you. And there's no easy way to do that, but you can do it better. So I thought that was, yes, you will have to piss people off. There will be horrible things that you have to do that are just going to eat at your soul that you don't want to do. But for the greater good, there's a way to do that. There's a way to do it better, but it also has to be done. As far as being misunderstood and not being able to defend yourself, that is, I'm not sure if it's a skill. It's maybe an art form. Learning how to do that, because it just chips away at you. It's death by 1,000 cuts or 1,000 drips, right? It's something you have to learn how to deal with and put it aside or accept it or absorb it as part of your leadership style. But it does happen, and it happens more frequently, more aggressively, the higher up the ladder you move. So
yeah, these are the reason I brought that up first is that there's so many challenges in leadership, and I really want to get your guys' insight on these because you guys have been there. Shaun, thoughts on this?
I do. So, Jim, you raised the idea that it's sometimes difficult to cut someone's head off. And may I present to you a samurai sword in the background, my katana, which is something that I keep in my mind on a daily basis when I step into my office and I'm sitting here. When I'm on a podcast, I can see it off my 6 o'clock. It always reminds me the difference between a manager and a leader. Now, a manager won't sit down and have to have tough skin and cut someone's head off. What they have to do is manage how many toilet rolls are in the bathroom. Managing is not leading. Leading has to do tough things. Leading requires a tough skin, i.e. a samurai suit of armor, and it requires the tools or the skills, i.e. a katana, to be able to take care of the moment that every leader has to face pretty much on a daily basis. And the further up you go in leadership, the more often you need a samurai sword, and the more often you need samurai armor. And so as a manager, you're more of a courtesan. You're more of a someone in the entourage, but a leader requires a katana. And so I'd love to build that out. But my simple comment is this, that as a leader, you are not a manager. You are more of a katana wielder.
So on that note then, how do we how do we learn how to have those conversations? How do we engage those early so that we can do them better throughout time? Or how do we teach the next generation to have those? I guess those are ands. But so how do we learn how to do those well early? And how do we teach the next generation how to do those? Jim, I'm going to come to you. What do you think?
Actively. The reason I say that is early on in my career, some short postings, had some good leaders, worked for some good people, and I just never had the time or the opportunity, I guess, to be mentored. And I think I mentioned it before on the show here. I've done some stupid things, and I learned by osmosis and out of necessity if I didn't want to get beat down again. So I have, I guess, taken that lesson and made it part of my style. I guess actively finding those that I supervise to provide those lessons early on, and actively not waiting for someone to fail and then whacking them and helping them along, but helping them along before they make those mistakes. And then also just something that's happened kind of naturally is seeing those people that are on that path where I was, and they're going to make those same mistakes that you did, and just maybe they're not somebody you supervise or somebody you have any contact with or need to have contact with, but hey, hold on, I see what you're doing, and let me just, without you being asked, let me impart my wisdom on you and share a story and help you out maybe in the long run. And that could be as simple as a conversation or a formal mentorship position, but that's kind of how I see that.
Yeah, I like that. Mike, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I like the mentorship piece of that, what Jim just said. And I think it's important to identify for yourself people that you would like to have as mentors, the type of people that you would like to have as mentors, and even have a conversation with them and say, hey, I really like what you did there. Can you teach me about that? And vice versa. As a leader, you need to take it upon yourself to be that mentor for people. And that's not something that is typically part of a defined job description. So if you're going to take it upon yourself to mentor someone, that's extra. That's more work for you. But it needs to be done, because that's how we create the next generation of leaders, is by showing them what works and what doesn't, by having difficult conversations with them, and by leading by example, like Shaun said at the very beginning.
Yeah, I totally agree with that one. Shaun, thoughts?
The question.
The
What's your
question is, how do we learn to have those difficult conversations, and how do we teach the next generation to have them?
So that is a learned process as far as I'm concerned. And so the sooner you get near or in front of great leaders, the sooner you are on the leadership path. Now, leadership, as far as I'm concerned, is not a passive absorption. It is an active absorption. So you need to know what you're seeking in life. If you want to be a leader, go seek good leaders. Be around it as much as possible. But no one can spend 24/7 with world-class leaders. So how do you work around that? Start reading world-class books written by world-class leaders. Or you start watching world-class documentaries about world-class leaders. And I'm not talking about watching a 90-second clip on YouTube or a 27-second clip on TikTok about what leadership is. Because if it's that shallow of a video, if it's so short, you're not learning about leadership. You're just learning about sound bites. And I think that that's a lot of what's going on right now on social media, is people are learning leadership through a 37-second long sound bite from a football coach from the 70s that is romantic and it's appealing and it's attractive because it represents something to someone, but that little sound bite isn't leadership. It's a sound bite. In order to understand leadership, you've got to spend a lot of time diving deep into the psychology of leadership, into the psychological, the emotional, the physiological aspects of leadership. We could spend an hour on this podcast talking about visual body cues of leadership. We could talk about how you can control a room without talking for an hour. And so leadership is a lot of subjects under a banner called leadership that is a massive body of work, but is now today being reduced down to 37-second long sound bites that is appealing, but a distraction from the depth of what leadership is.
I totally agree. Leadership is such a massive topic, and that's why I keep coming back to it show after show after show after show, is the fact that we can always dive deeper into it. And I think that this is it develops the next sequence in this. You know, we talked about having difficult conversations, how to teach the next generation. But where do we go from there? Right? We, as Jim said, we can mentor those people around us, we can engage the community, we can try to build people up. Outside of our example, how else can we do it? Like, should we actively take part in mentoring people that don't want to be mentored? What do you think, Jim? I'm going to come to you.
Like Shaun said, they're very, very important. That the social media sexy soundbite aspect of leadership is dangerous, and I think it highlights a point about being self-aware as a leader, or understanding your position, understanding the power of your position. The leadership position is for lack of a better word, it's an influencer position, right? And those little 30-second sound bites are dangerous. And the less time you get to spend with a leader that's higher up on the food chain, sometimes all you get is sound bites or sound clips, or a 1-minute meeting, and being aware of what you're saying in that 30 seconds or 1 minute to the person that may never see you again or may only see you once a year is extremely important. So just, I guess, in line with the timing aspect of social media, but also as a leader being aware that the amount of time you spend with somebody and what you say in that time could have year-long or lasting impacts, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It does have a lot of impacts. I know I was surrounded by some leaders throughout my time that were not exceptional, let's put it that way. And they left some training scars over the years. Mike, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think back to the original question you asked about, do we spend time on people that don't want to be mentored? I think the answer to that is yes and no. Yes, I think it's important to make the effort, but at the end of the day, if they don't want to be mentored, if they don't want to learn, there's other people that do, and we need to focus on those people. You can still be the one setting the example. You can still make sure you're taking care of everybody on the team. But if they don't want to improve, if they don't want to get better, if they don't want to learn, you can only do so much before you're just spinning your wheels.
That makes a lot of sense. Shaun, thoughts on that?
Do I want to spend time with someone who doesn't value my time? And my answer is simply no. There are over how many billion people on the planet right now?
I think we're at 8.
How many? Right. How many in North America? How many in my town? How many in my neighborhood? I could spend the rest of my life trying to help my town rather than help people who don't want to be helped. But as it currently stands, I'm trying to help at a larger scale. So I don't have the time to waste on people who want to waste my time. And so what is wasting my time? Showing up and not being prepared to learn in the moment, And I don't mean them showing up as a student in front of me. I'm talking about them and I learning together in the moment. And so as a leader, if I am a leader, I'm only here to lead in that moment. I'm not here to waste my time in the moment. And to be efficient with my time, I need someone to show up who has an open mind and who is willing to engage in the moment. If they're showing up not willing to engage in the moment, there's several other billion people that I can spend my time with. And so I'm not trapped in an office. I'm not trapped in a typical job. My world is a virtual world now with virtual leadership. And so to Jim's point, like, it's a new realization for me. And I'm not talking like today, I'm talking over the last couple of months, last couple of weeks. It's really being nailed home. And that is, I have to be way more careful about what I say in front of a microphone, because the microphone in itself is to some degree, a leadership position. And I've said some dumb things in the past, and it's taught me that I need to refine what I'm saying. And it has also taught me that the power of words is more far-reaching than I understand. And that has come to light over the last couple of months as more and more people let me know that they really appreciate or don't appreciate some of the things that I say. The feedback is critical to understand this question. And so if you're a leader and you are doing it right or doing it wrong, you'll only know that if you're seeking feedback. So delivering leadership one way isn't the way. The only way to understand leadership is to have a very open two-way communication highway where hopefully I get more feedback than they do.
This brings me to the next video, and it involves feedback and different mindsets and stuff like that. So I'm going to jump right into it, and then we're going to discuss it. So here we go.
Example of the Eurostar. £6 million spent to reduce the journey time between Paris and London by about 40 minutes. For 0.01% of this money, you could have put Wi-Fi on the trains, which wouldn't have reduced the duration of the journey, but would have improved its enjoyment and its usefulness far more. For maybe 10% of the money, you could have paid all of the world's top male and female supermodels to walk up and down the train, handing out free Chateau Petrus to all the passengers. You'd still have £5 billion in change, and people would ask for the trains to be slowed down. Why were we not given the chance to solve that problem psychologically? I think it's because there's an imbalance, an asymmetry in the way we treat creative, emotionally driven psychological ideas versus the way we treat rational, numerical, spreadsheet-driven ideas. If you're a creative person, I think quite rightly, you have to share all your ideas for approval with people much more rational than you. You have to go in and you have to have a cost-benefit analysis, a feasibility study, an ROI study, and so forth. And I think that's probably right. But this does not apply the other way around. People who have an existing framework, an economic framework, an engineering framework, feel that actually logic is its own answer. What they don't say is, well, the numbers all seem to add up, but before I present this idea, I'll go and show it to some really crazy people to see if they can come up with something better. And so we artificially, I think, prioritize what I'd call mechanistic ideas over psychological ideas.
Bam. And the reason I bring up this video specifically is because we all come from very single-minded organizations, let's put it that way. We have a very specific job to do, and we have very specific systems, and the way it's all put together is I'm not going to say incestuous, but like it's within its own house, right? So should we be seeking out ideas from the outside of our organizational or the organizational mindsets themselves? Is that something as leaders, should we be doing that regularly? Mike, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
One of the things he said in that video, and it's probably far from the point of that video, but it's the thing I liked the most, is we're going to do this thing and then show it to a bunch of crazy people and see if we can come up with a better idea, see if they can come up with a better idea. I actually think there's huge value in that, because it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking we know best because we have the X experience and we're in this position and I have these stripes on my shoulder or whatever. But what's that old saying? You don't know what you don't know. And that seeking to learn that we have talked about at length on this podcast, and seeking different sources of feedback, different sources of information, I think is one of the most important things that can allow us to grow either as an individual or as a team or as an organization, is getting feedback from non-traditional sources, asking somebody to tell me why my idea won't work instead of tell me why you agree with me. Tell me I'm wrong, prove that I'm wrong. And if you can, then perhaps there's something I'm missing. So yes, we should seek ideas from outside our organizations and from outside our individual professions, right? Like there's lots of things that cops can learn from, private business can learn from cops about all kinds of things. So we have to be creative if we really want to actually learn and actually grow.
All right, totally agree with that one. Jim, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree. An enthusiastic yes. Every industry has figured something out. Why wouldn't we seek that out and try and figure out what that industry has figured out and absorb it into our own industry? The problem is I don't think it's done that much. You mentioned, or sorry, the video mentioned numbers. Numbers are safe, and I find people who are scared of that feedback, or they don't want to be judged, or they don't want to put themselves out in front to be judged, and where something might go wrong, rely heavily on numbers. Those numbers are safe. They provide you a safety blanket. Can't argue with the numbers. Let's just go do that. But taking that artistic approach, utilizing the numbers as well as some artistry behind a decision, going out seeking feedback, changing the way things are done, that is scary. It's not for everybody, and it's, I would say, a mark of a good leader is to integrate some of that in there and take those calculated risks, pushing the needle forward a little bit. So I'm an enthusiastic yes to seeking out new information, new ideas, new ways of doing business.
Love it. Shaun, thoughts on this?
I thought it was a great video. It really hammered home the point as far as I'm concerned. To your maybe question, Chance, or what you were proposing is I think that the solution is within every organization, but the organization doesn't look hard enough to identify the out-of-the-box thinkers and give them the resources or the availability or the bandwidth to play. And so take the tail end of my military career. I was enabled to think outside of the box, though I was within a structure. And so the structure, you could call it, well, the military. And the military isn't known for radical out-of-the-box thinking. But I got to do that. And so it is available in every organization. But I think that most organizations identify who they are or what they are, and then pigeonhole themselves as that's what we are. And they do not seek the crazy people. I would consider myself a crazy person in respect to the norms within typical normative organizations. And we've talked about this on podcasts before. In fact, the guy who comes to mind is the Flying Hawaiian, who we have laughed about the idea that my life is rich because I like to hang out with crazy people who have crazy ideas and crazy dreams and push a crazy pace and accomplish crazy things. I love being around people that are so inspiring that they're almost alien in their inspiration. It has helped me understand that the tiny little boxes that most organizations operate in are embarrassingly small, and most of the solutions are inside of their embarrassingly small box. They're just not looking for the right qualities in the right people and enabling them to go kick the crazy ass. And it doesn't matter if the crazy person heads off in a direction and it turns out to be nothing. Well, now we know that there's nothing down at the end of the alley that person went down. All of these little alleys within organizations that are unexplored are that way because nobody has allowed someone to go and skulk around in the crazy alley to see what's up. Like, take off the leash and let someone adventure within the small box called the organization to bump up against the edges that no one else has bumped up against before and come back with a reconnaissance report that says, I see an opportunity here. And maybe someone else will pick up what they're putting down, and maybe someone won't. But at least that individual and perhaps some others will know that we made an effort. And I think that that is the crux of the matter. There's lots of efforts being made, but they're vanilla efforts that are same old year after year. They're tiny little initiatives that barely move the needle. And it's because there isn't enough creative out-of-the-box thinking. And so my point would be this, that I believe the solutions are inside of every organization. But I also believe that every organization doesn't allow the crazy to unfold.
I like where this is going. Let's go around again. Jim, you got any thoughts on that?
Yes, the crazy is good, but that doesn't have to mean 180. And I think that gets taken out of context a little bit too. Is like, yes, everybody should be seeking out the crazy and expanding your mind, expanding your thought process, and figuring out what's going on out there. There's some stupid stuff out there that's crazy. So it doesn't mean that because it's new, it's innovative, it's crazy, that we have to absorb all of it. We can absorb 1% of it from somewhere and integrate that into the organization too. So all those little 1% that you may find, there's incredible growth in that as well. So I'm thinking crazy is good. Crazy with direction is better, and integrating that into your established mandate is an artistic process, but it can be done, and you just have to find those people to do it properly without doing the 180.
Yeah, the integration definitely the key on that one. Mike, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, crazy with temperance. Pick and choose the little bits of the crazy, those 1%, like Jim said. And when you compile all those 1%, you might come up with a pretty good idea, or come up with an idea of why something isn't going to work the way you thought it would. And again, I say this all the time. It just goes back to seeking input and feedback from multiple sources, because the one crazy idea might be 99% ridiculous or 50% ridiculous. But when you take bits and pieces of it, just like you take bits and pieces from the books that you read and the podcasts that you watch and the TED Talks that you watch, and the people that you talk to, not everything is for everybody, but you can get something from everything if you look hard enough.
100%. I agree with that one. Shaun, you got any additional thoughts on this?
I do. I'm going to try and encourage everyone to be even crazier than they think crazy is crazy. And so let's just consider for a moment World War II, a guy called David Stirling, who is not quite solely responsible, but was an integral part of the creation of the British SAS. And so flash back to a moment where he decided that he was going to create a crew that was going to jump out of a perfectly good airplane with parachutes that basically they barely knew how to operate. And they all loaded up in that plane and they jumped out in the desert and got all kinds of beaten up. It was a poorly planned idea, perhaps, but it was a plan that had initiative and velocity. And because of that initiative and velocity, i.e., they did what they wanted to do, and no one was really aware of what they were doing, or it might have got stop-dropped. And so he kind of took it upon himself to go out there and kick that ass and see what's up, learn the lesson, and then move forward. And presto changeo, we now have special operations. And so there was a dude with a random crazy idea that helped form up the future. And so if he would have been constrained, if someone would have said, hang on a sec, sign for all of those parachutes and cross the T's and dot the I's, by the time all of the paperwork was done, he might have lost interest and just moved on. Or maybe he's just crazy enough to do all of the paperwork and then still go and do it in the shadows. And so I would encourage anyone to stop thinking like you can't move the needle. You can move the needle as an individual within an organization. You've just got to think outside of the box and then execute against it appropriately so that the success rate is high while still remaining in our modern constraints of the organization. So you're still bumping up against the edges of the constraints, but you're playing the game correctly, safely, within the limits of what the organization has allowed you to do. My point being this: if an organization gives you a box to play in, ask for a bigger box. And if you get the bigger box, make sure you're bouncing off of all of the edges within the box.
This brings up a really good point. And to that concept of Sterling and the SAS and all that stuff, there is a cost. There is a pretty dear cost to some of the craziness that went about with that, in terms of loss of life, in terms of loss of limbs, like the difficulties that then come through bouncing off of the walls and outside of the walls. There's a pretty high cost to that. And I think this is where most organizations shrink back from that, is due to the fact that that cost is high. So how do we utilize the ability to be crazy and still manage the cost? Jim, I'm going to come to you first. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're reading my mind there. That is innovative. That's cool. That probably changed the course of warfare for the last 100 years or 80 years. But from a leadership perspective, is I guess being careful to reward bad behavior, because that one went right. That one somehow took off. It got legs. So there's the integrating crazy within a structured organization, and how do you absorb those innovative things that may have worked out, and not encouraging them too much so that there's pure chaos every day when you come to work, and nothing works the way it should be, or there are no painted lines. That doesn't work either. So it brought up, yes, it's great if it works out, and it's great if that innovation works out, but making sure that there is some sort of process, or there is some sort of environment where you have cultivated as a leader so that you can take those calculated risks, but not prohibit them so much that people have to take risks that are uncalculated to try and drive something forward.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Mike, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think this conversation is using crazy as an all-encompassing term to describe what might be crazy, what might be innovative, and what might just be stupid. So I think I am all for crazy ideas, and this just might be crazy enough to work. But if we're gonna push towards a crazy idea that might be innovative or might be stupid, we need to be constantly assessing: is this crazy enough to work? Is this innovative? Or is this just stupid? And are we spinning our wheels and wasting our time? And we have to constantly reassess that.
Yeah, all good questions. Shaun, thoughts on this?
I like what both fellas said. They're right in line with my thoughts as well. And I propose David Sterling scenario. We could propose all kinds of scenarios that would have got the point across. And I understand that it wasn't an ideal scenario to include David Sterling ending up in the hospital with some breakage and then finally, willing his legs to move, and then finally willing his unit to move, and then finally willing history to move. And so, will you do it or will you not do it? Will Roger Bannister break the 4-minute mile or will he not? And so there's crazy. And as Mike stated, we're using the general term really broadly to mean many things. So I'm going to refine that down to there are wild people out there who will do wild things. And that's just who they are. That's who they need to be. Roger Bannister needed to break the 4-minute mile. Needed to. Not wanted to. Because if you wanted to, we'd still have an unbroken record. And so certain people need to do certain things that are apparently crazy, but they set the tone for the organization. They set the tone for the future. They set the tone for records. They set the tone for what's possible as humans. And so, as a leader, you're not only looking, I'll speak for myself. When I was leading people, or when I lead people now, my job has always been to push the pace, make it better for everyone around me, but make it better for the person in front of me. And so, if they don't know what they're capable of, I want to help them understand that they can break their own personal 4-minute mile. That's a big part of leadership, not just helping the greater or broader world around us, but helping the person directly in front of us.
I like that. Jim, you got any additional thoughts on this?
I'm just listening to Shaun there. It's interesting. Like there's so many different directions or aspects we can tease out of here, because there's pushing people to their absolute limit physically. There is some I've got in my head here, just because I'm an administrator now, basically. I've got some administrative leadership, and how far do you push administratively before it's disruptive? When do you keep pushing, but also know when to fold? There may be futility in the process that you're completing, as compared to something physical, or a physically tangible thing versus an administratively tangible thing. So, just very interesting how Shaun is using a specific scenario to tease out some aspects, and I had something else in my head, but now thinking about more physical or operationally tangible aspects.
Going administratively crazy. I like it.
Yeah.
Mike, you got any additional thoughts on this?
Yeah. Going administratively crazy was probably one of those leadership costs that we didn't talk about at the beginning when we were talking about costs of leadership, because you can convince people to do hard things that are hard for them as individuals. Sometimes trying to convince an organization to do hard things is one hell of an uphill battle. And I certainly won't throw any organization under the bus here, because they all have their administrative burdens, good, bad, and otherwise. But like Jim said, you gotta know when to fold. You have to know which crazy ideas, crazy meaning innovative or stupid, you're actually going to try to drive forward. Because sometimes the harder you push, the harder the organization or the administrative process will push back. So you have to pick and choose your battles, and you have to be willing to be flexible and realize that maybe today is not the day to push this one crazy idea. You have to be strategic about that, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I like that. Now, Shaun, you got any additional points on this? I got one more video too, so whatever you got.
Yeah, just so that I know, like, leadership is a huge subject, as we all know that. And so I've been speaking almost like singularly, but of course we are responsible to mentor and guide and raise up a new generation of leadership in any position that we're in. And so how we used to do it early in the day was we used to call it D&D, and that was delegate and disappear. Now it is, it has various other acronyms, but basically you just said, you do that now. I'll be back in 15 minutes. And that's a very simple form of leadership, but delegating and disappearing to allow another person to lead in that moment is critical to raise up a new generation of leaders. And so I don't want anyone to think that as a leader, you're always like at the forefront, leading the charge. You're the exemplary example of best in class. That is not the case. A lot of leadership is looking around trying to raise up a new generation of leaders.
You bring up a good point on the delegate and disappear. And I think there's something that needs to be brought up in this in terms of a lesson too, because when I went through, delegate and disappear was a pejorative. It was a negative thing to do, in that what happened a lot of times was you would a task would be delegated to, say, Corporal Burles. Corporal Burles, go do that thing. I'll be back in 20 minutes. And I would do that thing, and they would come back in 20 minutes, and then I would get jacked up for not doing it the way they wanted me to do it to begin with. Which is, I think, the issue here, is that I believe what you're trying to say, Shaun, is that to delegate and disappear is to allow that person to come up with their own solution and solve the problem. But a lot of times that D&D becomes you do it my way or you're going to get jacked up anyway. So I want to get your guys' thoughts on the delegate and disappear conundrum. Jim, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
Yeah, when it works, it's great. It fosters innovation. It allows someone to maybe come out of their shell that they weren't going to be coming out of for a greater period of time. But if done in the negative like that, that's crippling. It's crippling to morale, to that individual person, to anybody that may have seen it. That then cripples not only the innovation for one person, but the innovation for everyone in that unit or that group that is now going to not innovate because they are scared to come out of their shell and get beaten down. It's absolutely crippling if done poorly.
100%. Mike, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I actually haven't heard the term delegate and disappear before, but I like it. But just like you said there, what the two scenarios you described are two totally different things. One of them is micromanaging, by expecting them to know how you want it done and then berating them for not doing it the way you wanted it done. And the other way is what does Jocko Willink call it? Decentralized command, where you're allowing your subordinate leaders to take initiative and go solve problems in an innovative way or a crazy way, perhaps. So, like anything, you can call it whatever you want it, but you have to have the right intent, and you have to be doing things for the right reason, and allowing somebody to be innovative and solve a problem their way, as long as the problem gets solved, that is the right reason. Giving somebody no direction and expecting them to read your mind, that is a great example of how not to be a good leader.
Could not agree more. Shaun, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that, and that's awesome. So the idea being that if I'm a leader, what I would hope for any of my people, we'll call them subordinates for lack of a better term, what I want from them is for them to emulate good leadership, for them to emulate good solutions, for them to observe what I do and my peers, and then try to understand why we do that and how they could more efficiently or effectively do what I was doing the day before. I want people to emulate that if I'm leading. And that doesn't mean that they have to mimic. They just have to observe and try to create good solutions in their own way. And so I believe it requires this: someone to emulate, and then that person gets empowered. And that empowerment is a constraint that falls along the lines of, you can do this and you can do that, but don't do the other thing. And that's a loose construct. So they're empowered, they're delegated with the task, and then you disappear. And when you come back, you observe what has occurred. you process what you think you need to discuss in the next few minutes, and then you interact with the individual to understand why they chose the things that they chose and why they did the things that they did. And then you look for the two-way highway, where you're going to learn in the moment and they're going to learn in the moment in an open-minded conversation. To me, that's leadership. Now, of course, there's constraints. Sometimes when there's time constraints, if things are a little spicy, you can't sit down and have a cup of tea and have a chat about these things. Sometimes things are moving fast. But in my ideal world, someone emulates a good leader. They are then empowered to execute with the delegated task, which is then reobserved, reprocessed, and then redirected for the next day.
Yeah, and the reason I bring it up is the fact that, like, I know what you're talking about. I'm sure Mike and Jim know what you're talking about. People who have, studied leadership a little bit have a general idea what, good leadership is and how to use delegate and disappear and how to do these things. But to you guys' points earlier, that there are a lot of just sound bites of do this to be a good leader, the 3 steps to be a great leader, all these things that create this kind of idea that if you just do this thing, everything will work. And in reality, it's kind of a tightrope. Like, it's a tightrope that you got to kind of really balance your way through to be a good leader throughout most of your life, and at least in my mind. And I was going to put up another video, but I don't know if we have time for that one right now. Let's go around, get some thoughts on just that concept in general, the tightrope that is leadership, and then we'll get some final thoughts, and then we'll shut her down for the afternoon. So, Jim, actually, I'm going to start with Mike this time because I've done Jim like 3 times. Mike, thoughts on the tightrope that is leadership?
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to what you said there about those 37-second sound bites. Yeah, there's no one of those that is going to make you a great leader. But if you have 500 of them in your back pocket, and you know when to pull each one out, just like a carpenter knows when he needs X tool for X job, there is a time and a place for all of those little things. There's a time and a place to be a micromanager. There's a time and a place to practice decentralized command and just let your people run with their own solutions to a problem. And you have to know all of your people, and know what they're capable of, and know what their skill sets are, so that you know when to practice those different leadership styles. And that is a tightrope to walk, because you really have to pay attention. You really have to know who you're giving a task to, and you have to know how to provide feedback before, during, and after to make sure that they accomplish the manager's intent or the leader's intent.
Yeah, I totally agree with that one. Jim, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm just getting settled into this conversation. There's a lot going on here. The tightrope is it is real, I guess. The one thing that I found with respect to making sure you don't fall off it is keeping the right perspective on where you are in time, place, what you're dealing with. I've seen some big failures where you're reaching too far or too narrowly. Are you dealing with an organization versus an individual? Are you dealing with a big group versus a small group? Are you dealing with a new group versus one that's been well socialized to each other? Is it a positive situation, or is it one that needs some course correction? Do you have small amount of time or a long time to affect these things? So there's, like I said, the tightrope is real, and creating the right scope to the problem, or having the right perspective and learning how to create that perspective properly before diving into a situation, I think is keeps you on the rope.
Yeah, I like that. Shaun, any thoughts on this?
Well, when you propose the example, or as you were speaking about the tightrope scenario, what I did was I visualized it in my mind. Instantly, it just snapped into focus. And what I saw was actually not what you've described. I saw a tightrope that was about a mile wide, not long. And I'm on the mile wide tightrope because I've been leading a long time. my rope is not that narrow. My rope is super wide, man. Like, I've got so many tools as a leader now that I didn't have when I was a young buck. So when I was young, my tightrope was super tight, super narrow. Now it is not. So I have a mile wide tightrope that I get to walk on. It's the scenario that I'm entering into that is the tightrope, not my leadership. And so the situation is what will dictate my tightrope, not my tightrope dictates the situation. And so the other aspect of the thing that snapped into my mind's eye when I thought of tightrope was I'm way above. Like I was walking between two office towers on this tightrope. But that's not how leadership starts. When you start as a leader, you might be on a tightrope, but it's only 4 inches off the ground and there's a safety net underneath you. If you're being raised up as a good leader, you're being raised up with initial safety nets. So even when you're 30 feet above the ground on the tightrope and it's all super wobbly and you fall off, you land on a safety net. That's called your mentors, other senior leaders, people who are doing it really well that you're trying to emulate. They are your safety net. But eventually you don't have a safety net. Eventually it's just you. And when it's just you, what you need to hope, preferably rely on, is the fact that your tightrope that you're walking on is not just half an inch wide.
Yeah, I really like that. And your tightrope would be half an inch wide if you were relying on 37-second sound bites, I think, without any experience. So we are just a little bit over an hour now. I just want to say thank you guys. This has been really enjoyable. I got a lot out of this one. So thank you guys, Jim, Mike, Shaun. Awesome convo. It's been great. Any final thoughts on leadership, on lessons, on anything we've gone over so far? Mike, I'm gonna hit you first. What do you think?
I'm going to steal a quick story that I heard from Jim a couple of years ago on a course that he was speaking on. Don't worry, Jim, it's not bad. Many years ago, Jim was part of creating the first full-time Lower Mainland emergency response team in BC. That team continues to function at a super high level today. But I remember him telling me the story about when they actually accomplished that goal to get the team to go full-time, that when they got there, there was high fives all around the room. Everybody was celebrating. And what they failed to do at that point is ask what's next. And I think that question is a hugely important question for any leader of any team to ask. Absolutely take time to celebrate the wins and celebrate the successes. Absolutely take time to debrief the failures. But no matter what, ask yourself what's next.
I like that a lot. Jim, final thoughts?
Yeah, right back to watch the power of your words in the position you are at. I was worried what the story was going to be, but just following up on that, yeah, what is next? That's a key leadership question, and luckily our team here, we continue to persevere, and the thing that was next is just about done, like in the next couple of weeks. So being part of that and being able to push that forward over that long period of time and knowing when not to fold has been it's been great.
Yeah, I like that. Shaun, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to follow up with that. I mean, again, there's many things that we could talk about on the leadership aspect, but I think what we're talking about here is inspiring and motivating to get it to the finish line. And so it's one thing to inspire and motivate to cross the start line on a new team, to get something, a new initiative going, and etc. But eventually the grind sets in. Half a year, 4 years, 27 years later. The grind. A good leader will ignore the grind and will inspire and motivate, irrespective of what's going on. It's a rare commodity nowadays. Good leadership requires inspiration and motivation, and not motivation for the day, motivation for the future, to get it across the finish line, to inspire the team that you're in, for the team that you don't even know that people will be in the future. That's what we're supposed to do. Push the pace, get people to pay attention, get them on board, get them to smash, get them to win, get them to go across the finish line and look immediately for the next start line.
Yeah. I only have one thing to add to that, and the fact that is the largest and most profound lessons that I have learned throughout my life have come either from leadership or through leadership. And if you are out there and you're not really sure if you want to be in a leadership role, dive into it. Really. Start leading today, and that way you will learn all those lessons today and tomorrow and the next day and every other day beyond that. So that's all I got. Really appreciate the convo. Thanks everybody. Let's continue to learn, build, and grow. See y'all next week. Chimo.
Chimo.